Dr. Charlotte Tate, who's also an PI on the project, to look through the materials that was requested and redact any information that we felt was not supposed to be shared. That's basically what it came down to. And so based on FERPA regulations, we were able to redact the names of all the students and the staff that were hired, but of course our names remain on the documents. Okay. That's stressful. Then later on, this presentation that I'm giving now was taken off of the NIMH website, and that's why I'm taking the opportunity to share it with you all, and we're recording it so that we can put it back on somewhere. Okay, so that's why it's dated December 8th, 2022, is when I gave the presentation. Okay, then the grant that Rizal was talking about, the U01 grant for transformative research, was terminated in on March 26th at 2:30 in the afternoon here, which is 5:30 DC time, saying you must spending money today. That was really hard. And so I felt like I was using two little feathers to try to catch everybody that was falling off the cliff. So we paused for 3 months. Then Judge Young ruled that that judgment, that the grant should be reinstated. It took several weeks to come back. And then again, the Supreme Court decision came down on August 21st. And we worried, and we didn't spend, and so far we're okay. So, that happened and my father passed, and we'll see at the end that I'm dedicating this to my father. So it's been a hard year. Nonetheless, it's same old, same old. Same old, same old. And I'll be sharing some of that same old at the end. But I have not modified the presentation until the very end. And so I hope we really have kind of a rich discussion about why insider research is needed for transformative research to happen. And good news, none of those words are banned. They're not, none of them. I'm like, oh, not yet. Anyway, so means I can write a paper on this. And actually, I can write papers on a lot of things. That's what we're doing now because although the funding is in jeopardy in some ways, but also there's panels who are listening to the science, and so folks are getting funded even with these words in their grant proposals. Okay, just the banned words, just so that people know. But anyway, so I'm going to start with brief notes. So lean into discomfort. Okay, and that actually comes from the former director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., because only through discomfort can we change things, right? If we're comfortable, things will stay the same, and that's not something that many of us want. With respect to working across differences, trying not to do something makes it more likely that you'll think about it than do that very thing, okay? So what I would like you to do is to recognize that discomfort is going to happen, but discomfort is a good thing, okay? So let's frame it that way. And don't worry about microaggressing. It happens, just let it go, let's move on. But it happens because we don't focus on microaffirmations, wishing others to succeed. If we just focus on microaffirmations and wishing others to succeed, we can get rid of the microaggressions. And in the end, I think all of us can really think about the inherent benefit of diverse perspectives, and again, doing the microaffirmations to improve the practice of science so that all of us benefit from it. Okay? The problem with exclusive science is that all of us don't benefit. None of us, in my opinion, benefit from it. Because when you have stratified responses, it really affects even those that are getting the privileges. So, in terms of the point of this presentation, I'm going to define insider versus outsider. Insider researcher, or insider, is when researchers and participants share a common language and culture. Okay? Outsider is when researchers and participants do not share a common culture, language and culture. And so what I'm going to do is see what you think about these categories of researchers. And there's a QR code here. And so if you can bring out your device and scan that QR code and then choose A, B, C, or D. When I did this for the NIMH webinar, I actually had select all that apply, but we couldn't figure that out. So I know, just choose the one that's the one that you most agree with. The one that you most agree with, okay? And then Kathy's going to tell me how this works, because in my experience, I started out teaching with overheads. Yeah, y'all even know what overheads are? I mean, Like I am in my office, I have the little slides, like the ones that went on the little carousel, I have them because they're vintage, right? But you know, moving back and forth in presentation mode always screws me up, so I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna have Kathy do it. Are the responses coming in?
Yeah, they're coming in. We have maybe 15 more seconds.
Okay, 15 more seconds. Okay, yeah. I'm anxious to hear, to learn what the results are. Okay. 5 more seconds. Okay. Wow, it's across the board. Okay, some folks, the smallest number of folks think insider research is more biased. There's the biggest group is that insider and outsider researchers are equally biased, and then the other two are pretty the same. So I don't know what the answer is. I would say that what I was interesting is good science is not biased. A lot of folks had there. I'm like, how do you have unbiased science? That's the question that always sticks in my head because humans do science and humans are inherently biased. So how do you do unbiased science? In my opinion, you can't. So there has to be some good science that's biased. But you control for the bias by having diverse perspectives, and I'll talk about that. And so, in my opinion, insider and outsider research are equally biased, and having insiders and outsiders on teams mitigate that bias. Okay, so I'm primarily talking about clinical studies, right? Studies that focus on human populations. Because it's harder, if you're studying salamanders, I guess it's hard to have salamanders on the team. None, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, I just wanted to clarify that part. Okay, so in terms of Irvine et al., they consider insider research to be more rigorous, given if all other things are kept the same. Okay, so it's always good to have insiders if you're doing a study of a particular community, and that'll become more apparent in a cartoon exercise that I have. But first of all, I want to talk about the benefits of insider research that's done by minoritized individuals. And so this is obviously for research that's on minoritized groups, Black, Latino, certain populations of Asian, for example. So Dr. Fitzpatrick, what I've done in this slide and in all others is I've included the picture of the first author of the present, the first author of the reference that I'm giving. And so Dr. Fitzpatrick came up with these 3 points for the benefits of research done by minoritized individuals: the innate understanding of social and cultural norms, implicit trust, and deeply rooted personal reasons for the research. Okay, so I'm going to go on from here and explicate some of this. And so this is what Dr. Fitzpatrick talks about. And yet, how can we do insider research if folks from minoritized groups are underrepresented? And so this is actually a study that was done by Valentine et al. In 2016. That's on the left-hand side. And then led by Dr. O at UCSF on the right-hand side. And so what this first panel shows is the representation of women, underrepresented women, so women of color, well-represented women, underrepresented men, and well-represented men. And what you can see from the various colors is that, in fact, the groups that the insider researchers are, there's not that many of us, that kind of thing. Okay, that's the point that I'm trying to make. With regard to what's said in the O et al. Article, Dr. O said, most physicians and scientists are informed by research that is extrapolated from a largely homogeneous population, usually white and male. And in fact, clinical studies in the United States, the last time I looked at the data, 89% is for white participants, and then only 11% is for everyone else. Okay, that affects the generalizability of the work. Everybody understands that, right? That's sort of obvious. So obviously then it affects the accuracy, the ability to make impact. In fact, this slide by Dr. Symes, and it also affects health disparities. And so what he's talked about is why have we made so little progress? And he had 40 years, this is a slide that was given to me by him. but it's 55 years now since 2018. And it's because the Research Institute, which is all the questions that are being asked inside the Research Institute, fails to really look at unanswered questions, questions that community wants answers to in terms of their own well-being, and unquestioned answers. So someone asked me, can you give me an example of an unquestioned answer? And I'll tell you the one that triggered me when I was young. When I heard that the reason that Latinos are not in school is because Latino parents don't care about education. I'm like, wait a second, who did that study? Where did that study come from? I mean, I know so many parents that are working 2 jobs to put their kids through school. And the kids are still giving money from their financial aid. So that's an unquestioned answer, okay? In my experience, Latino parents, just like many other parents, really care about the education of their kids. And then some of them don't, and some of them in all the other populations too. That's an unquestioned answer. Does that make sense? There's been a lot of unquestioned answers. In fact, what you can barely see here is Claudio, in 1997, put together a paper where she talked about, with respect to the unanswered questions, that one of the reasons that is happening is because minority scientists are more likely to ask questions relevant to minority communities than their white counterparts, okay? But if there's so few of us, then those questions don't get answered, right? And then unquestioned answers. If you don't have insiders on the team, there could be misinterpretations. There can be cultural particulars and I'll have a cartoon exercise that really shows that in a second. There can be cultural particulars that get put together. I know there's a better way to say that, but I'm not. Anyway, and so then the answers that are provided are not or accurate. With regard to minority scientists, personal is professional, and folks do it for very personal reasons in many cases, and despite the fact that you don't get funding very often. So this is the 2019 paper that shows African American Black applicants on the top and white applicants on the bottom, and then it looks at the number of proposals submitted, how many were actually discussed, and then the overall funding rate. And you can see that it, just by the width of there's about the same number of applications, and it goes down, and it goes down more for the African American Black grant makers or grant PIs of proposals, and then the funding goes down after that. And when they looked at what was limiting the funding, it was topic choice bias. Okay, so now in our current environment, there's way more topic choice bias. So how are we going to be able to ask the questions that are relevant to our communities if we can't even use the words, right? So this is, but back in the day, this is what I was presenting in the 2022 presentation. So in terms of the innate understanding, what I would say is that the innate understanding of the social and cultural norms leads to better data collection, primarily because there's the trust to actually recruit individuals. There's improved data analysis because the nuances can be interpreted better from individuals who actually come from those communities and understand the norms and how folks think about things in those communities, so that you can actually have greater accuracy of the conclusions drawn. What I didn't put here is you can also have more impact because then it goes back out to the communities in a better trusted way. And it minimizes erroneous interpretations. So the next slide is the cartoon that I'm promising. And what I'm going to frame is that you're going to talk to the pair next to you and see what so that means we're sliding down the middle here. Anyway, you're going to see what you see and then come up with a thought bubble for the first, this is a cartoon, right? Come up with a thought bubble for the first number 1, okay? So, y'all see what's going on here? Okay, is there any questions about what you're seeing? Okay, so now talk to the person next to you, and what would be a thought bubble or speech bubble for the personified dinosaur in the first one? You talk to the person next to you. Let's bring you back. Thank you for that burst of energy. It's given me more energy. Okay, so obviously there was a very loud. It was a loud conversation. So I'm going to ask for 3 hands about what you thought the speech bubble or the thought bubble for dinosaur number 1 would be. 3 hands. two. And I was having male presenting folks, maybe I can have a female voice. No right answer. Who's being nominated? Somebody's being nominated over there. They accept the nomination.
Nominate a girl.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna go with you first.
It's not good, but you needed a woman.
You know, that's thank you for stepping up.
Yeah.
Guess I'll die.
I guess I'll die. Yeah, because that's what happens, right? Okay. Okay, and then you were last. Okay, then there was, okay, Michael.
Yeah, but we might be hungry. Dinosaurs are hungry.
Yeah, dinosaurs behind me, yeah. I love that. So I love the first two responses, and then the last response really sort of tied the whole thing together. So this individual said, I hope scientists in the future are paleontologists, right?
Yeah.
Don't make me look like a sunflower, which is what they did, right? Okay, so my favorite, because I've done this exercise with a number of classes and training programs, is who's that? Who's that? So in terms of the archive, this is what the dinosaur looks like. It's in the museum. Everybody's learning that that's the way it is. Okay, so I have read many papers on Latinas who have not had an insider research on the team, and I'm like, who's that? Who's that? And I'm like, no, oh no, oh no. And I can give you examples after the fact, but that's one of the things that can happen, that if you don't have individuals who really understand or have interacted with those communities. Obviously, this is a sort of a false example in that you can't have a dinosaur on the team, right? But this is what can happen. Cultural particulars are misaligned, purposely or not purposely, to achieve aims, and then it's not really accurate. Okay, so in my own experience, when I grew up, I always heard of the lazy Mexican. My whole childhood, it was always the lazy Mexican. That was the stereotype I always heard. And I'm like, wait, I have a lot of Mexican people in my family. I don't know any of them who are lazy. Now, I recognize that my sample size, I didn't know that was the word back then, but I'm like, they either have one job or two jobs, or work at home and work outside. And I'm like, well, where is that coming from? So my whole life I was like, and then I would cross the border and I would see these little statues, right? And so these are presumably Mexicans, sombreros, sitting, taking a siesta, which is cultural. It comes from Spain. In Spain, if you still go now, like they close from 2 to 4. I mean, you just know that it's going to be closed from 2 to 4, and it actually has shown to have benefits to health and community well-being, and there's a lot of good things that happen. But like my abuelo, Leopoldo, it was because it was really hot. It was really hot, and why work? Spend a lot of extra energy during the really hot part of the day when you could just conserve, right? It's being a scientist and observing, then seeing that, hey, I took a siesta and I'm more productive. Anyway, so my abuelo, I would say, abuelo, do you work hard? No, mija, I don't work hard at all. Oh, what do you do, abuelo? I get up in the morning around 5 when the sun comes up. I go out and do what needs to get done. Then, I take a siesta, or I come home and I eat my lunch. And then I go back out and I work until I get dark. And then I come back home and I do what needs to get done, and then I go to bed. No, mija, no trabajo para ti. I'm like, wait a second. Wait a second. So the thing is what that taught me is that work was not something to avoid. Work was not something to fear. In fact, it's the bendición de Dios. It's the blessing of God. It's the way that you can actually give to others, right? So that's also a different perspective, right? And so I don't know that perspective is represented. It is represented, I'm sure, in other cultures, but it's very prevalent in at least the ones that so that's, so anyway, the lazy Mexican thing I never bought, okay? And I think that's one of the reasons why I really stayed away from stereotypes. The second thing, and that's an altar. Okay, why do I have the altar there? When I first got here as a faculty member, I used to sit on panels with other Latinos who were staff and researchers here. And one, Lupe Avila, who was in counseling and psychological services, was asked, why did you continue your preparation? And she said she was an assistant social worker, and a mom had lost her oldest son and had 3 children who had been taken away because of the devastation it caused in her life. And so Lupe would visit her, and she was like seeing that she was getting better, and that she really was able to take back her kids. And so she asked the social worker who could sign off on it, when will she get her kids back? And that social worker, who was an outsider in terms of this culture, said she'll never get her kids back. She's talking to her son in the house all day long, and she has an altar to him. Okay, for those who don't know, that's culturally appropriate behavior. We talk to our dad, and we have autares to them. So that one misunderstanding led to the fact that she didn't get a kid. She wasn't able to bring back her child to the family. Okay, so Lupe became a social, a counseling person in order to eliminate some of that. Okay, I bring these up because one of the things that we don't always recognize is the community cultural wealth that folks bring to the scientific enterprise. And so this is Tara Yoso Tara, and she talks about community cultural wealth, which is at the center of this diagram. And then there's all the capitals, and those are the assets. Those are the inherent assets that all of us have in terms of various aspects of our lived experiences, our grounding, our ways of being. And so I'm not going to talk about all of them, but this paper is wonderful. When I read it, I was like, oh, okay. And all the references are at the end of this presentation, and I don't know if you post the presentations afterwards, no? Oh, okay, well, but I have them if y'all want them. Okay, I'm just going to focus on aspirational capital and resistant capital. So aspirational capital is aspiring to achieve a certain end, despite all the signals that you shouldn't do it, despite all the barriers that you can't do it, despite all the ways people want to trip you up so you fall. You're still going to keep doing it. That's aspirational capital. And that is enhanced in communities of color by giving back values, which I'll show in the next slide. And so it actually, what I'm saying is you actually persist because if your communal values are affirmed. The resistant capital, and I'll also talk about that in a second, is necessary to shift paradigms. Because paradigms are existing structures, and so in order to change them, you have to resist them first, and then work to gather the evidence base to change it. Does that make sense to folks? Okay, so with regard to aspirational capital, this is actually a study, bars in the middle, done in the CSU. So y'all know that the CSU is part of 23 campuses. It's the largest university in the world, and so it's a really good place to do the research that can actually advance equity in education. And so in this study that was done in 2011, what they did is they had a control group and a treatment group, okay? And in the, and this is just URM, underrepresented minority students. One of the tricky things about reading literature on underrepresented minority students is there's a bunch of different words. There's historically underrepresented, there's peers, there's anyways, but they're all meaning the same thing, minoritized. So this study, what it showed is that, in the left side is the underrepresented minority, that in terms of 6-year graduation rates, so completing your undergraduate degree in 6 years, 52% did it when there was no service learning component in their science classes. When they had one service learning course, one, okay, in that 6 years, the 6-year rate goes up to 74%. That is really, that's a big deal. Okay, so then I'm like, why don't we have service learning in all biology programs, all across the CSU, in all science? I mean, that to me makes so much sense. Anyway, and it doesn't adversely affect the 9-year end. Before and after the treatment, there's about the same amount of 6-year retention rates, right? So you always want to make sure you don't do harm to the other populations. So having one service learning is not going to affect the other populations. Does that make sense? Okay, but it really will benefit these individuals, and I think it'll benefit society. If we all can see that as scientists, we can really make a difference in terms of what we're doing. Okay, resistant capital. And so that's me. And the reason that I have that picture is because I'm going to tell a story about my resistant capital and where the origin story, which I already told a little bit at lunch. My Twitter handle used to be @BrownLenses, but then somebody bought that platform and I can't use it anymore. So, but I love brown lenses because I do see things through brown lenses. Anyway, resistant capital is knowledge and skills developed through challenging inequity. Okay, so back when I was 4 or 5 years old, I'm not exactly sure which one, because my mom was an immigrant to this country, and she put me in kindergarten. She put me in kindergarten before she put me in preschool. So she put me in kindergarten, and then she met with the other moms, and the other moms were like, well, she's not doing so well in kindergarten. Does she go to preschool? Oh, not yet. I'll put her in there next. So I didn't know that till like 10 years ago, when I was about 50. So that's why my memories are muddled. You know, I knew I was in kindergarten, I knew it was in preschool, but I didn't know that I went to kindergarten before I went to preschool. Anyway, so I don't know which one it was. But in any case, I'm on the blacktop, and it's really hot in Sacramento, California, and I have on the dress that my mom made for me, flannel out of Hancock fabrics, Hancock, you know, the dollar bundles, you know, anyway. And my mom made me that dress, and she gave me a faux fur curl collar, right? So I knew I wasn't dressed like the other kids who had JCPenney or Sears or whatever, you know. But I was like, it doesn't matter. I'm in school. I'm learning English. My parents are so proud of me because when people come over, I can read in Spanish and English. And someone comes up to me and they said, gosh, it's too bad you speak 2 languages. It makes you so dumb. And I went, wait a second. I speak 2 languages. You speak 1. This is in my head, all in my head. Maybe I'm not the dumb one. Okay. So what I realized is that people can take data and change it with their bias, change it with their intentionality, change it with their agenda to do something different, right? And in that case, to put me down, right? And so I'm like, I'm going to be somebody who uses data to lift people up. Okay, that was at 4 or 5 years old. I mean, that's how that experience was so like, and then later I started reading papers. And one of the most important papers that I've read was this one from Catherine Phillips. And, you know, again, putting the pictures of the folks. And Catherine Phillips talked about how diversity makes us smarter. She has a lot of really interesting observations in there that are data-based. She actually has a whole list of references. But the biggest reason is that if you have both insiders and outsiders, or you have different groups of perspectives, right, then what you can do is it makes you work harder. If you're in a homogenous group and you share your opinion with like-minded people, you're all going to go, right, for the most part. It's when you know that you're going to get challenged that you're like, you know what, let me really make sure I'm up to speed on this. So that's one of the ways that having diverse perspectives actually leads to smarter science because you actually hone your arguments better. Okay, so going back to the Fitzpatrick and talking about now how the implicit trust of communities for which they are culturally representative can improve recruitment and retention in clinical studies, and it also leads to better science because we know that this is in 2015, 40% of the US population are group members of minoritized groups, and if they're left out of these studies, then the work is not generalizable, right? It's not going to be able to be relevant to all the other ones. So with regard to the recruitment and retention, this is Yancey et al. She did a meta-analysis looking at papers from January 1999 to April 2005, where she showed that if the study team had an insider, in this case, an underrepresented minority, historically underrepresented person on the research team, that it actually increased the participation of those groups in the clinical study. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough URM or UIHU principal investigators to look at that. There was no statistical significance. There's so few of us. So that wasn't looked at, but I would predict that as hopefully the diversity of the PIs, there'll be an effect. Okay, but in any case, that's what Yancey showed. And representation does matter, and so this is just a correlation. But this is something that I observed maybe 2018. So, because this was published in 2014. So this is the changing workforce. Back in 1990, there was 27,500 approximately biomedical scientists. The vast majority of them were white, and then you can see that there's a smattering of other folks, okay? Then in 2014, so almost 25 years later, you can see that the representation of Asian scientists really goes up, okay? So what I predicted is that personal is professional. I suspect there's going to be more Asian participation in studies, right? That was my prediction. And then I read this Popjoy paper. So this must have happened, it was published in 2016. I didn't find it too much later. But anyway, and in this Popjoy paper, what she found is that about the same, so 2009 to 2016, the number of genomes from different populations increased especially for Asian populations. And I'm like, well, gosh, you know, now the Asian scientists are having more innate trust maybe with their Asian communities, and they're asking the question, why aren't we included? And they're working personal as professional. And so what you can see is that there's a correlation. There's a correlation between differences in the workforce and actually what gets included in the data sets. Okay, so that was the motivation for the project that Dr. Tate and I took on, is to actually make sure that when we were looking at the effects of nature exposure on BIPOC TAG, that we actually included BIPOC on the study teams and in the research staff. Okay, those are the insider researchers. Interestingly enough, when it was announced at San Francisco State, this is what was announced. Innovative research investigates the health benefits of reclaiming nature. And then you see the picture. And I'm like, what? I'm like, really? Anyway, first of all, I'm like, I don't know who, you know, the folks are. Are they members of BIPOC communities? I can't tell. But that's sort of fancy clothing. I mean, I'm making all sorts of assumptions, right? And they're going into nature, and you know, I'll give you a better example. This is what they could have used. So, Pasito was a prelude to the Head to Woods project that I just talked about, the insider, the nature-based. So Pasito stands for Promoting Activity and Stress Reduction in the Outdoors. And in fact, the paper, Kathy's on that paper, others are on that paper. Edgar Velasquez, who's now inducted into the Alumni Hall of Fame, was on that paper. Anyway, that's a picture from one of the activities. So with the Latina Center, and I was the PI, but I was out here and they went in. Those are the folks that went walking. And, you know, I'm like, it's intergenerational, you know, and I'm like, well, maybe that could have been a better picture in my opinion. But that's the thing with digital literacy, right? You need to be looking at the pictures and seeing if they actually represent what they're supposed to be representing. Anyway, so but enough of that. One of the things that later, and this is Mendes et al. In PrEP, because it was in PrEP in 2022. Now it's published, it's 2024. And the first author is Rebecca Mendes, who is a PhD student at UCSF in epidemiology and biostatistics. And Kathy is the senior author. I'm in the middle, because they did the work. And so one of the qualitative responses that was gathered is why, asking the question, why did you participate? Why was the retention rate so high? Because you can recruit big folks to a study, but do they stay in the study, okay? And then what I highlighted is we would get involved with all that, they got involved with all that we did. So there was definitely this feeling of the research staff weren't there just to like zoom in and extract out, which has been many studies in these communities, extractive. It's really, we're gonna go in, we're gonna deal with you all, and then Kathy still maintains a relationship with the Latina Center. It's been a decade, has it? No, almost a decade. So the point being that, and the thing is when folks went in to try to say, hey, what study can we do with y'all in terms of engaging folks with walking in nature in order to improve some of the chronic stress that the families were experiencing, they said, well, that's nice, but we'd like our kids to be scientists too. So before that happens, can you do an outreach to our kids where they actually learn about science and how they can be scientists? So that's the first thing that happened. And what you see there is Edgar with one of the kids, and they're extracting DNA and making these little DNA necklaces. Okay, so that's what happens with community is, you go in with one agenda, but if you're really doing community engaged work, you really have to listen to what the agenda is of the community and support them in ways that you need to support. Okay, so this is, I'm just gonna, we're near the end, and there'll be time, okay, I dismiss something that's not going on my computer. Okay, thanks. Okay, so, I made the case that insider researchers lead to diverse participants, and what I'm showing here is on the right-hand side, is the PIs for our study, which is myself and Dr. Tate. There's the co-investigator, David Revenall. Originally, it was Angela Gallegos Diaz, who's a curandera and community activist. She works for Roadmap to Peace and the Instituto Familiar de la Raza. And most recently we had a different curandera, but that's after that. And then Leslie Para. Leslie Para is the outreach manager for Save the Wetlands League. Leslie was a master's student here in conservation biology. When the pandemic hit, she called me up and she said, I took a class with you a long time ago. And she said, but I'd like to do something with our communities who are like having to stay inside, but they need to get out. And the studies that Save the Redwoods League showed that most parks were not being utilized by that population. How can we fix this? How can we make nature be accessible to all folks? Okay, so that's down there. And then this is the original SEERS, the Student Insider Researchers. Result came on later. And so their SEERS is S-I-I-R-S because insider has two I's in it. So it's pronounced SEERS because they see things that even us older folks don't see. So we're working with BIPOC TAY. TAY is Transitional Age Youth, 18 to 26. I haven't been 26 for 40 years. 40 years, well, no, less than 40 years. Let's see, 36 years. So they would bring up all sorts of stuff that we had never even considered. And so we had our student insider researchers or San Francisco State students from all the different populations. And then we have an insider and outsider team. I'm insider with respect to Latinos, but I'm outsider with respect to Black and Filipinos, which were our defined populations. So all of us paid dual roles. We were insiders and we were outsiders, and that's the way we mitigated bias. These ideas are not like new. I know that when I came here as a beginning professor, I was immediately put on the Centennial Task Force. And so I learned about SF state history, okay? And what many of you may not know is that we are known for the greatest, well, the longest strike, student-led strike in the history of the country. So this university had a strike that lasted almost 6 months. It's not greater, it's almost 6 months, I should have, anyway, in 1968-69, and it was for greater inclusion in academia. It resulted in the only college of ethnic studies in the country, and the idea is that teaching and research would be done by people of color, with people of color, for people of color. And there's an Agents of Change documentary that was done at the time. It's a great, great documentary, it's online. We've shown it to folks. And so Agents of Change can come in all shapes and forms, and insiders and outsiders in terms of communities. And in fact, we have an Agents of Change initiative within the SF BUILD program. Merck Pharmaceuticals funds that, and they funded us because we had written research papers on training and how we could change training to be more innovative. And so to be an agent of change, you engage in science that's community relevant. That's the criterion, okay? So what can that lead to? It can lead to transformative research. So this is Dankwa Malin. Dankwa Malin basically published this paper in American Journal of Public Health where she talks about the various circles of different kinds of research that can lead to paradigm shifting research. And one of them is the transformational research that examines culture, that creates a vision, that identifies structures and system changes that need to happen in order to overcome structural barriers, that tests an idea so that it'll be institutionalized, so that it doesn't just sit on a shelf in a paper, but actually changes policy, makes science have a community impact. That is the end of the original presentation. After that, I published this paper in 2024. I put my little picture there, so like the rest of them. And this is figures 1 and 2 out of my single author paper. I never thought I would have a single author paper, but I have a single author paper. I know it may not be a big deal to a lot of folks, but like for academics, it's a big deal. It's also a cell-based journal. In Nature, Cell, and Science are like the big three. And Patterns is their new journal, and it's for data science. And so in it though, I have these two figures, which is it's really cool. They were on my computer and now they're in like a paper, and I mean, it's like, anyway. So the first one is my rendering of a series of papers that shows that if you have what they call homogeneous high ability problem solvers, and I'm like, well, how did they decide they're high ability? But anyway, I'm always being critical. So the homogeneous high ability problem solvers all come up with a solution. But the group of diverse problem solvers, which could include insiders and outsiders, can come up with the same solution. They can also come up with a worse solution. That's what the model says. But the only way to get it out of the park, to have the innovative solution, is to have a group of diverse problem solvers, okay? So if you want innovative research, you have to have diverse problem-solving teams. Then, how do you get there? How do you make sure that when you include these diverse individuals, they're actually bringing their whole selves into the mix? And that's why SF BUILD is enabling full representation in science, because too often many of us feel like we can't come into the science classroom being our whole selves. And so, you know, even this morning, no, actually not anymore. I was like, I'm gonna put my Aztec medallion and my Aztec earrings, and it's gonna be all good, you know, because I have ancestry Zapotec, that is, you know, originally the Azteca, and they were the premier applied mathematicians of the world at the time that they had Tenochtitlan. And so, and I could, you know, I'm sure people have different opinions, but I'm like, you know what, I come from that lineage. So, how does that get retained? Well, it only gets retained when in an affirming, inclusive environment. But before I talk about that, I'm going to talk about the non-affirming environment, which is the one that I experienced. And one of the reasons that I was told that I would not make it as a scientist, because I was told I was a circle and science was a square. Okay, so I remember that person telling me, and it was on this campus, by a peer, and they drew it on the board, and I went, wait a second, no. The square is 3/4 empty, and me and others like me are the ones that are needed. So, anyway, in this case, there's the white square, there's the circle with the stripes, which is meant to indicate diversity. And what happens in many institutions is that little circle gets dampened out and put into a square, right? Then you put it back and you have a non-transformative situation. You get the white square back, right? Okay, this is visualization. In the other case, the square gets amped up and it integrates and you get something new. You get something that's new. There's a new pattern. It's transformative. That's the way this sort of thing works. And so for science to be innovative and transformative, we need to have diverse groups, insiders and outsiders, all perspectives. And then I'm going to show that this work was funded by a number of grants, and I forgot to talk about SF Bridge a little bit, which is the Building Research Insiders to Dissipate Gaps in Equity. That's in partnership with the UCSF, the Center for Tobacco Research, where all of the researchers did not come from the quote-unquote priority populations, Black Latinos, which smoked the most, and yet they were doing research to do behavioral modifications on how to get them to stop smoking. So we wrote a proposal to bring students from here, from those population groups, to support. Anyways, I didn't talk about that. But that's the funding. And then all except the U01 grant is gone now. But back in the day, that was all the funding. These are the references. And then the last, oh, you know what? They leave at 3 o'clock. Then they leave at 3:05 to give some time to okay, sorry. I forgot that I was supposed to end it. Okay. I want to just do the last piece. So my dad died on August 8th of last month. And my dad was a bracero. So for those of you who don't know the bracero program, it's the program that the United States had after World War II when there wasn't enough laborers in the country to do a lot of the work. And so there was a formal program to bring brazos, arms, across the border, and my dad was a bracero. He worked picking cotton for a while, didn't like that so much, and so he ended up being a construction worker, and was part of the team that closed Highway 5. I have the pictures. So from Mexico to Canada, my dad was part of that team that closed Highway 5. He is my role model. That's him and me in a pink dress. He's my role model for being resourceful. So he was not able to get an education because he took care of the ganado, the cows on the rancho. And so he got himself into seminary school by pretending to have a vocation to the priesthood. And then he didn't finish the degree program, or get the high school degree, whatever, because he didn't take the vows. But he was the role model, like, you do what you gotta do. And so today's environment, and I said this already, is sort of same old, same old. So we need to be resourceful, and we have to stand for something. Resist, obviously, what you don't, but stand for something. So when I was a beginning professor, I used my familial capital, which is the cultural knowledge and resources that come through family. My dad made that cabin. That's in the microbiology lab on the 6th floor. Outside of me, with the support of others who were like-minded, we got him a vendor contract on campus. It was a San Francisco State vendor, and he made that microscope cabinet. Here's an amazing press, self-taught. Through the doorway, you can see the Health and Equity Research Lab, which someone said that I'm the director of the Health and Equity Research Lab. That's not true. Kathy's the director. We were co-directors for a while, and that's a model that's coming forward to have more than one PI be in a thematic lab. And so if you look through there, my dad helped with making shelves in there. That was the lab space I had the second and fourth time. When I first got here, I had a different lab space. Then I was given this lab space. We did that. The third lab space is around the corner over here. It was a teaching lab. And my dad made the shelves, and we made the shelves on the benches and the ones on the wall. And I remember standing up on the thing and just pounding. And my dad taught me how to do a good nailing job. I don't know if that's the word to say it, but I could do it. Back in the day, I couldn't do it anymore. So that's how I used familial capital to achieve some things that I couldn't get done on this campus without it. That's basically. And then I wanted the social capital, so networks within your communities that can provide resources and support. So Dr. Russ Higuchi was a part of the team that developed PCR. He worked with Henry Ehrlich. Henry did not get the Nobel laureate, Carrie Mullis did, one of those situations. But Russ was married to a colleague of mine, and Russ worked at CETUS, and he would say, we have this Taq polymerase, and it's gonna go bad. The expiration date on it is gonna go bad, but I know that it's still active for 6 months. Can I send it to you? I'm like, yeah, for sure. So the additional Márquez-Magaña lab would get regular shipments of Taq polymerase. There was just, and then Homero Rey, who is somebody that I went to grad school with, he worked for the company that first came up with the first model thermocycler. So he gave us the prototype. So the Márquez-Magaña lab had the first thermocycler in the department. And so there's ways to get over on these kinds of challenges that we're having now, and is to really be resourceful. So I apologize for going a little bit over, but I really wanted to do this last piece to sort of give us going forward, there's things we can do using our collective power is basically what it comes down to. So thank you for your attention.